Welcome to this episode of the Best Hopes podcast. My name is Adam Froer.
I'm Cecil Walker.
And today we're going to go back to an episode that we did in the first season. It was actually episode number 4, and it was about awaiting. And we want to spend some time kind of pulling apart one of the ideas that we talked about in that episode. And before I kind of jump all the way back into that, I want to ask you one question that's kind of been mulling around in my head. And for those of you who are listening, Cecil has no idea what I'm going to ask him.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think it's kind of a hard question, so you have to stew about it for a second.
Warm up or anything.
But the word await is a bit of a weird word. So what is the difference, or is it the same thing as just waiting? What's the difference between await and wait? We didn't really pull that apart last time, and I've been kind of mulling it over and thinking perhaps that's something we should talk just a little bit about. Why await?
I don't know if this is for me or some type of linguistic expert to answer, but at least in the function of a lot of these words that we've been talking about, I can hobble together what I think. All of these words, first of all, are stemming from some version, some sliver of hope, the action of hoping in some kind of a way. And I think we can see pretty clearly that when you are hopeful for something, when you're hoping for something, right there in that, what I just said, there has to be a something. Mm-hmm. So if I'm feeling hopeful and I express that to someone, it's likely the follow-up to that would be, well, what are you hopeful for? What's got you feeling so hopeful? What inspired that? What are you thinking is going to happen? What are you looking toward, if you're being hopeful? And I think the same could probably apply to awaiting. When you're awaiting something, there is a something. There's a scenario, there's a place you're going, there's some thing that you're awaiting, and it feels relatively specific, more specific than nothing, than more specific than, whatever comes, comes. And I don't think waiting is specific like that. I think waiting feels like I'm potentially just getting through whatever is happening right now. I have no intention for what comes next. I'm not setting my sights on anything, purposeful in what's coming next. Or either it's not about something specific that you're waiting for, or you're not doing anything in getting to wherever you're going next. I'm waiting for, for this year to be over. I'm waiting for, to get through this graduate program that I'm waiting. It kind of feels like when it's phrased in that way, if that's how you describe what you're doing, it's a very passive thing. I'm not doing anything as I wait for that time, as I'm kind of letting time pass by because I just want to be at the place of wherever that next thing is. Like even in more casual things, you talk about waiting for the bus or something like that. Or you're waiting for, someone else to get ready before you can leave. That time isn't for something. It isn't functional in any way. There isn't much purpose to it. You're probably going to spend that time wastefully. You're probably going to, look on your phone or kind of like, pitter patter and just you're wasting time kind of. And I think when you compare awaiting with waiting, especially how we described it last season, when you compare those things together, they look very, very differently. If I were to describe something I'm awaiting, a scenario, an outcome or whatever, that's very, very different than if I describe I'm just waiting for blank. And I guess linguistically it feels kind of subtle, but I think the meaning making you put into all of it is very big, very different.
Man, you're a genius. I knew we had you here for a reason.
Glad I'm here for a reason. I'll wait to take the genius title though.
Because that's interestingly, so I was searching online to see what is the difference. I had to go do some work, and you just knew it off the top of your head.
Is that what they said?
But it exactly what they said is waiting is just the general passing of time. And awaiting is the anticipation of something specific. And what you then went on to explain, which I think is, again, genius, is that therefore what you do with the time becomes meaningful. If I am awaiting something, I'm actively doing something to bring that thing about.
Mm-hmm.
And so my behavior beforehand becomes purposeful. But also it is in service of that particular thing that I am awaiting. I'm doing something to bring it about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's those two components of the time beforehand becomes meaningful, but also I become an active participant in that outcome becoming the outcome.
Yeah.
And you didn't even have to look anything up. You were just like, okay, so this is what it is.
Let's hit dark. They're going to land somewhere.
So with that context now of like this specific awaiting, I think even that will give us a whole bunch to launch off of. But I'm going to take us back also to this episode 4 from season 1, where we talked a lot about awaiting. And I want to go back and I want to read something that you said, again, because you're a genius. And you said really early on in that episode, you said, when we take moments to invest in a particular kind of hope, in this case, awaiting, and to do the action involved in that kind of hope, we know things change, and they change in the ways that we can capture and be fulfilled by and be happy with. So I've got like 10 more questions. This might just be an interview session now.
That's for past. I don't know if I am the same.
So one of the things that I love about what you just said, and again, this just like rolls off your tongue, like, oh, no big deal. This like genius just is flowing out. But you said you inherently linked hope to action.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said, and then you created a connection between action and change. And then you added this really cool word that I need you to explain more about. You said, when we know things change and they change in the ways that we can capture. What do you mean by that? Like like how do you capture change? Because I think that's a really big component of this idea of awaiting. If I'm awaiting something, once it happens, I want to be able to capture it. So how do you do, what does that even mean? And how do I capture hope?
Well, I think the bulk of what's behind that is it's some combination of words like purposefulness and intentionality and meaning that you've invested into a particular kind of perspective or a particular kind of outcome that you're looking for. And I think when you swirl a lot of that stuff together, it then kind of puts you are prepared for something to come and respond to that perspective that you have, that hope that you have. It's almost like when you pray for something, you're like, I really need this to happen, or I really want this thing, or I need this type of change in how I'm feeling, change in the situation. There's going to be a response to that, especially if you are, really, really emotionally invested in that. You're going to get an answer somehow. And I think that's the capturing that happens, is how you make sense of what comes after that. And so I think a lot of this probably, we had episodes where we talked about kind of religious aspects of this too. I think a lot of this could spill over into that, because if you're awaiting something in a similar kind of sense, you're hoping for something, and you do find yourself engaging in the actions related to moving toward that thing. The capturing part happens when you get the quote response of what happens, after that, what seems to be coming along, what's changing as you move toward that. And the absence of that capturing is you don't make any sense of what is happening after that. You're not putting any meaning into it, because change is happening, nearly every day. But it could very well be that you either attribute some other type of meaning to it, or you think nothing of it altogether. And I think we see that oftentimes in therapy, where people come in and say, things have been so terrible for, so long, and here's all the problems, here's all the things that have gone wrong. But as they start to talk, you could see not only over the course of, several months and years in their life, but even in the past several days, there's been fluctuations in what they've been experiencing. On this day, for some reason, I woke up early and I had a good breakfast, and I even went to the gym and I made plans with friends. And I usually don't do that. But the next day I was back to how I was normally, feeling. And so I couldn't get myself to do that. And I hate how, I can't get a good streak going on how many days in a row that I'm doing really well. And to them, it could feel like this means I'm in a bad place. But if you're looking through it the lens of, a hopefulness for a return to your better self, that right there means quite a lot. That day, that moment, that change that you saw there, I could capture that as something actually really powerful and really meaningful and make a lot of sense out of it in ways that if I was absent of or lacking that particular perspective, that particular hopefulness of I'm looking toward being better, it would look totally different, it would mean different things. And I think I use the word capture because I see it as it would fly by without me getting to get anything out of it. I had that day and it meant nothing to me. And I didn't get to capture, the good things that I could take from that, the change in how I feel, change in what maybe I think of my situation. It feels like it was almost wasted. It just went by. That was a lot.
It was a lot, but it was really, really good. I, again, have like 25 questions for you because I really like the idea of capturing something. And the way you kind of talked about it was like almost like acknowledging or recognizing. And my question is connected to this awaiting. Mm-hmm. If part of the steps are I do something, I'm active in trying to bring this about, and then I capture these like signs or changes that you kind of mentioned, I recognize them, I make meaning of them. The question I have is, I don't even know how to formulate it, but am I responsible for bringing it about? Or like you also use the example of praying. And I think a lot of people would say like, I'm praying because what I'm hoping for is beyond my capability to bring it about. So I'm hoping some other being or entity will intervene and bring it about on behalf of what I'm praying for. So I'm trying to get at that balance of like how much, if awaiting is action bound and capturing change moments, how much of it am I responsible for versus how much of it just happens outside of me and I'm just trying to catch it as it goes by? Because you're a genius and the authority on this thing. Yeah. You've just became an authority to me. Now I have all the questions that I need you to answer. I
was unaware I was an authority on this, but since we're going this way. And I don't know that this is that satisfying of an answer, but I do think it's both. I think there's an inherent relationship between when you set out for that thing, when you're hoping for the thing, you're awaiting a thing, or even in the example of you're praying for a thing. I think there's an inherent relationship between just taking that kind of intentional action and setting your sights in this intentional kind of a way that now you are aligned, and people can interpret that spiritually if they want, but I also think like, psychologically, you are there's an awareness to you about the things relating to this thing you're setting your sights on now. You're aligned with what goes into that kind of an outcome. The things that you are seeing, the things that you are doing, the things that you're paying attention to now all kind of can get filtered through this particular kind of a perspective in this particular kind of a direction. So I think that that's just inherent in doing that. Like if it's kind of like if, you told someone, look for all the really pleasant things that happened today from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. Just look for all the really pleasant things that happen. By the end of the day, they might feel like today was a pretty decent day. A lot of pleasant things happened. But if you told them, look for all the really unpleasant things, look for everything that was really antithetical to what you want, by the end of the day, they might feel like, well, maybe today wasn't that great of a day because I saw a lot of things that were antithetical to what I want. The part where I think the action and responsibility comes into play is responding to what is inherently there. Because on that, I think today was a pleasant kind of a day, you might start to interact with the world differently based on where you feel like you're at and what you're feeling. If I'm feeling pretty good, I probably treat other people a little bit better. If I feel like, oh, there's a shot at having the kind of a day that I want to have, well, then I'm going to invest in that. I'm going to try. I'm going to, treat myself well. I'm going to make decisions that lead towards some of the stuff that I want, since I feel like I can have the stuff that I want. But if I'm in today was an unpleasant kind of a day, and it feels like some of the things that I'd like to happen aren't happening, or I'm constantly being reverberated with these undesirable kinds of things, I'm going to feel worse. I'm going to think less of what's possible for me. I'm going to have a tendency to try a little less at all these things that I might really want to see pan out, because I feel like it's just a little more useless than I would have in some other scenario. And I think there's both intentionality and a lack of intentionality in that. But I do think that is a place where a lot of agency can start to come in. And I think what you do with that piece can make a very, very big difference with your, progress toward whatever this outcome is that you're looking for.
Mm. Okay, one more. Maybe
you look like you have more than one more question.
I think I do. So just to recapture where we are, because I think you said some really important things. So this all came from, I'm going to read your statement again. When we take moments to invest in a particular kind of hope and to do the action involved in that kind of hope, we know things change, and they change in the ways that we can capture and be fulfilled by and be happy with.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to need you to fill in this whole fulfilled, right? If I capture these things, if I'm purposeful about making them happen, but I'm also taking advantage of when fortuitous things just happen, I capture them. There's that fine balance there. I can see how that's going to increase hope, right? I'm looking for certain things to happen. I'm behaving as though they're going to happen, therefore awaiting them to happen. I'm going to capture these things. How does that lead to fulfillment? You didn't know when you made this cavalier statement that I was going to pull it apart with scrutiny, but I think that it's hugely valuable. I
guess I should start assuming that anything I say around you is open to future deep diving scrutiny. I think, well, here's a good example, and then maybe I can piece it apart a little from this example. I think everyone has ideas when they're little of what they'd like, what they like to be, what they like to have, the kind of life they'd like to have when they're older. And depending on how seriously you take that, or how much you really invest in that, how passionate you feel about that, I think that could very easily be a source of potential fulfillment when you get to see, I'm being exactly what I said I wanted to be when I was younger. I'm doing the thing that I said I wanted to do. I'm living the kind of life that I said I wanted to live. And I think I give that example because I feel like that's very relatable for most people, even if it's something like, for some people, it's you wanted to be a doctor when you were a kid and then you grew up and you went to med school. But for some people, it's I want to live in this particular place. I want to live on the beach. I want to live in the big city. I want to move to the West Coast, whatever. So I think it's very easy to notice how when you find yourself with access to the kind of change that you originally said you really, really desired, how that kind of is fulfilling. That kind of feels like I'm being the particular kind of version that not only I really want to be, but I've kind of fulfilled what I set out to be, with a lot of intention and a lot of purpose somewhere, back down the line. And so the fulfillment piece, I think, comes in a seeing what you were trying to visualize when you weren't yet in that place. When you are somewhere far away saying, there's where I want to get. And then you actually get to see yourself be in that place. That's the fulfillment, I think. And I there's a lot of ways where I think people, get to see that fulfillment in different kinds of iterations. But I think it's this kind of intentionality of here's where I want to go. And then you pay attention to how close to that am I? Did I get to where I wanted to go? Did I fulfill this, check this box in some kind of a way? And I think that's where the fulfillment happens. That's where it's this sense of I'm doing it, I'm being it, I am this, I have this. And I think it's obviously it makes you feel very, very good, but I think it's different because you don't have to feel like we're past the point of awaiting then, right? We're not hoping for something, and maybe you still are hoping for more or continuation or something like that. But this is the sensation you get of, I have it, I am it, I'm doing it, I'm in it. There's something very present and real and me about this thing. And maybe that even goes hand in hand with some type of gratitude and appreciation. But to get to say, I'm here, I'm doing it, this is amazing, this is great, this is what I wanted. That I think is the fulfillment part. Did I answer your?
Yeah, you actually answered. And I guess this speaks to why we should never go into a question with an assumption about what the answer is going to be. Because I, from reading that, was thinking in some sense that fulfillment was like satisfaction. I feel fulfilled. And you got to that in the end of like, I'm being it, I'm doing it, I'm feeling it. But you went the route of fulfilled as like, I completed. I checked that box. I met that thing. I became that. And so to think about those two versions of fulfilled, what I really like about the way that you answered the question is that it links two things. One, the awaiting. I awaited, I behaved in this certain way. And change, you said, then change occurred, right? So I went about this hoping to change something, and then it was fulfilled. It did change. But then at the very end of what you said is, then there's some satisfaction in knowing, oh, I did achieve what I set out. So you got to that second form of fulfillment, which I think then leads you to the end part of what you said, which is, and I can be happy and to be happy with. And so I think that what you laid out, if I were to go back and I were to say to the listeners of this, like, you just laid out this huge, important pattern of how to achieve success. Awaiting is hope. You have to first begin with hope, but then you have to await with anticipation. You have to say, okay, here's what I want to happen. This is the behavior that I'm going to put into play in order to make that happen. I'm going to capture the moments when serendipitously maybe things come along, but also when my behavior pays off and it's indications of change. I'm going to capture those moments. And the more I capture those moments, I kind of build up to, now I have arrived at this thing, this place, this identity that I have awaited. Now I can cherish that. Now I can be happy with that. Now I can be fulfilled by that. I can say, now hope has turned into reality. And you just laid out this like beautiful pattern of, in essence, how to become who and what you want to become with this like one simple sentence of like, here's what it means to await. Isn't this beautiful?
Well, I feel like that's a lot of our conversations. There's probably plenty of lines that you could go sentence by sentence or word by word and find some formula for, how to make the most of change in some kind of a way. But yeah, I think you're right. At the time, I don't think I would have said, here's the formula, but that seems to be what came out of it.
That the genius just laid out formula for success. Okay, so now I love this new format that we have going on here.
This is very temporary format.
I think this is our new podcast format of me interviewing you.
No.
But I then, in the previous episode, went on and just added a bit that I want to get your feedback, because I'm not going to talk about it, but I want to get your feedback on what it was. And I said, it's interesting because a lot of things I was thinking of are the beginnings of something. I await the beginning of something, or I await the end of something. I've been doing this thing, and now I expect or anticipate the end of this thing. And so with this formula that you just laid out around beginning with hope, awaiting through this process, capturing things, finding fulfillment, getting to happiness, how do you see that intersecting with this idea of usually I'm awaiting the commencement of something or the completion of something? Tie that into your formula for success for me. Which is really an unfair question, because I really am saying, make my words fit your words. Now go.
Don't worry, I've got some questions for you.
I think we're going to be out of time.
I'll be quick. I think this just speaks to, maybe it's a conceptualization thing, maybe it's a narrative thing. But when we find ourselves setting out to do something, to be something, to have something, to accomplish something, it does seem to be in the terms of I'm either exiting this phase or this place that I've been in, and or entering, a phase or a place or a version of myself, maybe even. And I think that becomes really clear when we look at, any movie or any book that we've ever seen ever. There was already a life happening at the beginning of the book, whoever the main character is or the main group of people or whatever, something was already going on. Even if the book starts at the birth of, such and such main character, there's a context of they're in this lineage or of this particular space and time, or here's the mythology around where they're being set in. There's stuff already happening. But still, we see a beginning come into play when that person or persons identify the outcome that they want, which I guess you could kind of frame any book or movie like that. There's an outcome that they want that now the movie moves along because they're trying to get to that. There's a beginning to that just out of the sake of they set out to have that thing. Or even, sometimes there's movies about, we're trying to end this thing. We're fighting back against this problem, this power, or we're trying to end this phase of oppression or difficulty or whatever. And so all of that is to say, I think that inherently seems to come from if we want a thing, it comes in these kinds of terms, I think, or at least that's how it'd be hard for me to kind of see it outside of that, because I think that's how we seem to inherently conceptualize it, even though we could be somewhere along any number of paths, any space in our life, whatever years into our lives that we are, and we say I really need to be more of a confident person. I really want to accomplish these things that are important to me. I want to start this small business, or I want to be more connected to my relationships, more of a family kind of a person, or I want to be someone who's more open and more ambitious, or whatever it is. I think once you set your sights on that, like I was saying earlier, now it's like, okay, well, start. Like, this is the beginning of this phase of this thing. I can try to be that. And I think another example of how inherent that seems to be to just our human psychology, I guess, is, I forget what they call it, but there's this effect that happens where people are more likely to make a change, a pretty substantial or important change, at certain temporal markings, certain time markings, like the beginning of a week on, it's Monday of this fresh new week. And this week I'm not going to eat too many sweets, or I'm going to.
Now that feels personal.
I'm sure you're not the only one in the world who likes sugar, though you might be the one who likes it the most. I don't know. Yeah, anything like that. I'm gonna be more physically active. I'm going to work on whatever this passion project is, this amount of times this week. People do that at the start of a week, or at a birthday, or a certain, age that they reach. They certainly do that at the beginning of the year. It's January 1st, and this year is all about this thing for me. I'm going to try to be more like this, try to do or have more of these things. And so I say all of that because I think that speaks to there's something essential about this other phase ended and this new phase is starting, and that's consequential. That's important. That has meaning to it, or at least I'm putting meaning into that. It fits this meaning making that I can have. And then people do really hard things. Then they, work out more than they've ever worked out before, or they, eat very, very differently. They handle their money very, very differently. They interact with people very, very differently. And who can say how long that lasts, how much that is now a new part of them or not, but they do something different and it's substantial and it takes a lot of effort when it would feel like less likely or less havable if you said, on 2:33 on a Thursday, I'm going to really change my life and be, this different kind of a person. I don't know why that is, but it just seems to be inherent to that. But you're the person who originally said it.
Don't try to flip this over now. I'm on a roll here.
I'm going to help you roll.
But one of the things that I really do love about what you said is, well, really two things. One, when we begin something, inherent in that is hope. We are saying, like, by beginning this thing, by eating less sugar, by working out more, by whatever, I'm hoping this thing will happen. Mm-hmm. And so just by taking that initial even thought or decision, turning it into action, that's an evidence that hope is present. It's an evidence that now I'm just awaiting the arrival of, said body figure or status of health or whatever it is. And so I think going back to that idea of capturing, I think sometimes we don't really think of, when I start this thing, this is really an evidence that hope is present. So I think that's an important component that we should kind of insert, is, since this is a whole podcast about hope, is that just that alone is evidence that hope is present. But the other thing I think that's really valuable about what you said is that in some sense, beginnings and ends are arbitrary. We decide, January 1st is the beginning of something. Nothing in the cosmos says, January 1st is the beginning of a new year. It's just the next time the sun comes up. Mm-hmm. When we turn that specific age, right? Maybe it's 30, maybe it's 40, maybe it's 50. We say, okay, this is the beginning of a new. Well, there's nothing inherently different about the first day that you're 30 versus the first day that you're 29. It's just that we have placed meaning on 3 decades is a lot, and now I'm going to make this one meaningful. Mm-hmm. And so I think inherent in that, like, ability to attribute meaning to a beginning, in some sense, that hands so much power to us. You kind of jokingly said 2:33 on a Thursday afternoon doesn't seem like the most appropriate time to make the beginning of something. But I could, right? I could say, like, okay, from this moment on, I'm done. And you hear those stories of people who, like, quit smoking, like, cold turkey. And it very well could be at 2:33 on a Thursday afternoon. But whatever it is, that particular moment, they have attributed meaning to it. And they are now saying, like, from this moment on, I await the arrival of health or happiness or satisfaction or whatever it is. And I think that when we think about beginnings and ends as arbitrary in some sense, then it hands us as individuals a huge amount of power to say, I can make any moment a meaningful moment. Tomorrow when I wake up, I'm going to be this kind of person. Or next week, I'm going to not do this anymore. Or I'm going to start doing this now. And so I think that's one of the things that I really like about this concept of awaiting that you previously laid out in your success formula is it's about capturing. Mm-hmm. And I think we can capture the beginning just as well as we could capture the middle or a sign that something's happening or a detail that fell into place. We can capture, okay, whatever starting moment I want, I'm going to capture that moment and I'm going to utilize it for all it's worth. And I think that that allows us to take a large amount of power in this change process. It allows us almost to like pump additional hope and to be like, I can make this the hopeful moment. I don't have to wait for some magical thing to happen. I can decide that right now is the moment of hope.
Yeah. It's two really significant things about what you said that stood out to me there. One is this whole thing sounds like some type of like constructive nihilism of like no particular day of the year or of your life has to be the change making moment. And that isn't a depressing thing. It doesn't mean, you can't change your life. It actually means the opposite, that at any moment you could change your life. January 1st doesn't have to mean anything, but if that's the day that has meaning for you, then that's amazing. Maybe January 12th means something. Maybe that's the day that you turn your life around, or you do something very different and you suddenly decide, here's what I want to be awaiting. And I think that there's a lot of power in that when you kind of realize that, because you kind of released yourself from what might be some limitations in your understanding of when you can change and how you can change, and pull yourself through this new threshold of how malleable you are at all times. But then the other part that where you kind of added back in how central capturing is to all of this, it made me think of how I feel like there's been a lot of books that I read where, and I can never remember the authors, but I'm speaking very generally right now, so it doesn't matter, that they will reiterate how data driven the world is right now, how like everybody is collecting data, not just companies on us, which that is happening, but people are collecting data on themselves too. People want to know, how active was I this week? What's my average heart rate, my resting heart rate? How many calories did I burn? How much sleep? There's so many apps that are like tracking your sleep. How much sleep am I getting or not getting? How many calories am I taking in? How many calories am I burning? All this seems to be related to fitness. But I think even like how many hours on my phone am I spending? How many hours on the internet am I spending? There's all types of data points that people are kind of collecting and consuming, because I think people are just interested in having some type of outlook on what they're doing and who they are and all those kinds of things. But what I think is interesting about that, and the reason I bring it up, is there's a retroactive capturing, I think, that seems to happen. You get to the end of the week and it tells you spent 4 more hours than you normally spend. You're just kind of wasting time on your phone. And that makes you think back to, 2 weeks ago, I barely spent any time on my phone. When that thing came in and it told me I only spent a very minimal amount of time on these apps or whatever, and I just, I didn't realize that was such a peak, or that was me being more of this version of myself that I want to be. And now it feels like I'm outside of that moment. Now you can feel kind of worse off because you missed the chance to capture it back then. Or if you look at like sometimes the Apple Watch or the fitness apps or whatever will tell you after several months of like trends and what you're doing, like you sometimes can feel a little insulting. It's like your mile time is like way lower than it used to be last year, or you've decreased how active you are compared to this particular time period when you were really, really active. And it's helpful in an informational kind of a way, but what it seems to do is tell you missed the chance to feel like you were at the top of your game. Any of us, it's hard for us to know back then that like, I'm at my peak. Here's where I'll look back later on and say, this was where I was really doing it and having it and being it. So, but if you don't capture it there, it feels like you lost it. And it might even feel like later on you're living in the shadow of it too. So I feel like that really illustrates how crucial it is to make sure you're capturing things. And there's things to capture, I think, at all times too. I'd even add that part to it.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I have more questions, but for the sake of time, I think we're getting close to
you can't ask them
time. But I really also like this new format.
No. This was a one-time thing where you caught me off guard.
But I think the way that I might wrap it up is with what you said at the very end, which is, and we can be happy with where we end up. And I think that's where I would say that's the whole point of hope, right? Is we're hoping to get to happiness. We're hoping to get to fulfillment. And so really, I would just say thank you for laying out this beautiful pattern, because now I know how to get to happiness.
You magnified it. I wouldn't have captured it.
But is there anything else that I didn't ask or that you didn't get to articulate that you want to make sure we get to?
No. I'll come at you full of questions for next time. So
I'll be prepared to turn this around. But thank you for all of you who listen. Hopefully this even thinner slice of awaiting was helpful for you. Hopefully now you can be thoughtful about what you want to await, how you want to behave according to what you are awaiting. Hopefully that leads to capturing things, leading to fulfillment, leading to happiness. If you know somebody who would benefit from this kind of intentional consideration of how to get to happiness and fulfillment, please share this podcast with them. We would really appreciate it. But in the meantime, go capture those meaningful things that will lead you to where you want to end up.